Frances was late to embrace feminism, but she got up to speed pretty fast when she figured it out. "Poor Hank," Isabel once remarked to Frances. "He married Harriet Nelson and ended up living with Gloria Steinem." And so the Land's End Breakfast Club was born. Two independent, middle-aged women finally enjoying breakfast on their own terms, and with no dishes to do. Isabel and Frances were as close and as different as two people could be. Frances was brash and to the point. Isabel, circumspect and thoughtful. Frances was brutally honest. Isabel, cautious and diplomatic. Frances was excitable and high-strung. Isabel, calm and measured. But these were guidelines, not rules, and on occasion, if the circumstances called for it, they flipped the script. What never changed after 40-plus years of friendship was their unconditional love for each other and a fierce loyalty, going back to the first day of kindergarten when Jacqueline Klinger bullied Isabel out of her chocolate milk. Thanks to Frances's intervention, after finding her new classmate Isabel sitting on a swing and crying, Jacqueline Klinger ended up wearing that same chocolate milk all over her head and all over her crisp white Raggedy Ann pinafore. And Frances ended up in the principal's office. Isabel returned the favor the following year when their first-grade teacher, a mean old battle-axe named Miss Marlin, came up behind Frances and flicked her ear so hard it made her cry, just for whispering to Isabel during morning announcements. Miss Marlin returned from lunch that afternoon to find several thumbtacks planted on her chair, waiting to greet her rather large posterior. Their occasional recollection of the shriek that came out of Miss Marlin made them laugh out loud to this day. Theirs was an unbreakable bond, and though it had been strained a time or two over the years, it was a bond that always held fast. Unlike Frances, Isabel was shy by nature, and not somebody who wanted or needed the sort of attention that had recently been visited upon her, so playing the role of local hero was more a burden than anything else. Her snowballing notoriety as a small-town crime fighter was becoming more and more difficult to deflect, but it would appear she was stuck with it, at least for the time being. Her reluctant celebrity began a few years after her husband Carl died very suddenly, following a heart attack. Carl's modest life insurance policy covered his funeral expenses and paid off some bills, but that was about it. Both her kids were out of college, so there wasn't that expense. But if she was going to survive, Isabel knew she had to go back to work. But doing what? She had long ago given up her career as a hairdresser, which was a job she enjoyed about as much as she did scrambled eggs. But as a middle-aged widow with no college degree, Isabel didn't have much choice. The Michigan economy was a mess, and jobs were hard to come by. So eventually she started doing hair again, converting the mother-in-law apartment attached to her garage to a hair salon. She also managed to toggle together a handful of other part-time ventures, enough to keep the lights and heat on and keep herself and the dog fed. But in the years of widowhood that followed, she never really felt she was ever in the clear financially. There always seemed to be an accumulation of bills and an assortment of other expenses looming, along with the occasional big-ticket surprise expense. So she was continually on the lookout for new revenue streams to fish. She was open to any and all possibilities. Provided she was physically able and it was legal, Isabel was game. Which was how she ended up accepting a job doing hair and makeup at a local funeral home. It was not a job she particularly relished taking on, and she wasn't anxious to meet the person who would, but it was more money than she could pass up for an afternoon's work. So she braced herself and decided to at least give it a try. Not only would she be helping out her bank account, but she would also be helping out a dear friend who was in a bind, and who happened to be the owner of the funeral home. Little did Isabel Puddles know how fateful this decision would be, or where it would eventually take her. Although she never finished college, Isabel did graduate from the Whitehall Beauty Academy with honors. But putting her skills to work on the newly departed was not something that had ever occurred.